My name is Iliyas Issatayev, and I am the founder and the CEO of Hero's Journey, an IT and fitness startup developing fitness studios with built-in gamification. We have successfully raised 1.3 million seed round.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in and welcome to the Fundraising Debrief, the podcast where we share the real stories behind successful founders and the recent VC financing rounds. My name is Vlad Cazacu and I'll be your host today as we interview Iliyas Issatayev and follow his journey from M&A consultant to fitness club entrepreneur before deciding to revolutionize the gym industry using gamification. In this episode, we explore the challenges of raising capital outside of a major VC market and how anyone can leverage their strengths to create a compelling fundraising narrative. For more information about running a successful fundraising round, including show notes, highlight clips, and exclusive scenes, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Fundraising Debrief, as well as on our website at thefundraisingdebrief.com. This episode is brought to you by Flowlie, the all-in-one fundraising hub used by thousands of founders from 65 countries to plan their rounds, share their deck, and track access. Now, let's dive right in. Iliyas, such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and joining us today.
Thank you, Vlad, for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about this conversation. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it and discussing more about yourself, Hero's Journey, your latest seed round, which, by the way, congratulations on making it. It's been definitely an interesting year in the VC financing route. So props to you for being able to close this round.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are very excited to finally have closed this round.
I bet. And before we dive into Hero's Journey and your recent round, we'd love to spend a second on yourself. I mean, you started your career in consulting right after college, and at some point you made the jump into the fitness industry. And I would love to understand why, how, when. Give us a bit more context about this passion around building fitness studios.
Yes, so to properly introduce myself, I should give a context that I'm entrepreneur based in Kazakhstan in Central Asia. So after university, I spent a little bit time working in PwC, in consulting, in some other companies, but I had always had this urge to be entrepreneur. I started my first business in 2012. So right now I have like 11 years of experience in business. Most of it, of course, is just traditional business. My first business was in grocery supermarkets, actually. That business didn't suit me well. So in 2014-15, I transitioned into fitness industry. My first project was I tried to bring American CrossFit franchising to Kazakhstan. It was successful initially, but we ended up failing with that business. It went bankrupt. But I have learned so much, especially in understanding the behavior of customer, because the CrossFit failed because we didn't count how many times our client would visit. So we would lose a lot of clients from the first contact. That led me to get back into drawing board. I tried to start from the consumer, like what consumer wants. And I came up with this new idea, which was traditional business, but it was like right business model, right pricing. The project was called Invictus Fitness. I started this company in 2015-16, and now Invictus Fitness is the largest chain of fitness clubs in Kazakhstan. We have like 30 clubs, a lot of which are really big clubs. Like if we are talking in terms of square foot, it's like 40,000, 50,000 square foot facilities. So it's traditional fitness. We are very successful. But along this journey, I have discovered that there is inherent problem in fitness itself. The thing is, a lot of our clients have long-term memberships, but they still don't go to fitness, and this is the problem. And when I tried to understand why this is, I've learned that because fitness was in its current form was invented in the US, in Venice Beach, California, when Arnold and all the other bodybuilders started to work out in 1980s. And if you look now, 40 years later, the idea is still the same. You have open gym, you have equipment, which is pretty the same. So it was actually a product which was designed for professional bodybuilders. And somehow, at some point, some smart businessman could put good business model on it, which is always based on the fact that you sell long-term memberships for people who overestimate how many times they are going to train. They end up getting into this long-term contracts. and then they don't really go to fitness that often, which allows you as a businessman to cramp in, instead of 2,000 members, let's say 6,000 members. That's how fitness works all around the world. So we decided to start from the scratch and ask if technology can help to change the customer journey and design a fitness studio which has its goal, the metric which we call engagement. Engagement is basically how many times per month average user goes to fitness. And it started from small experiments I did in 2017, 18, 19, but formally I packaged it in a new company called Hero's Journey in 2020. And for 1.5 years, we were developing this new studio concept. And I'm glad to report that our clients with Hero's Journey train 2.5 times more often than in traditional fitness environment. So we are very confident that we have product solution fit. That's how I
Fantastic.
ended up here.
Fantastic. And I feel like you're solving a problem that has been experienced by probably every single listener of this podcast around the 31st of December, 1st of January every year, when
Yeah.
everybody gets excited and buys that gym membership and then realizes in March that they haven't been maybe once or twice. Props to you for creating a startup that actually helps people get fit and get more healthy. I'm curious to understand, though, your decision-making process behind transitioning the software to Hero's Journey and not furthering on Invictus Fitness. Like, why did you decide to start a technology startup?
First of all, Invictus Fitness is still growing as a very successful company in Kazakhstan. And secondly, Hero's Journey is unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, it's not a software. This is the question I've been asked a lot. It's a digital customer journey where we use our application, and it's a dedicated automated fitness club. And this software doesn't work with any other fitness club. So when we want to scale, we have to physically open new studios.
Interesting. So it seems that I was misled on this understanding. So you are
This
actually
is
operating the studios as well, not just the software platform.
Yes, that's correct. This is a very usual misconception. Every single VC asks me whether it's possible to make it just a software and scale it without needing to open the gym. But the thing is, the most, I mean, there are a lot of IT companies, there are a lot of applications that is supposed to work with a lot of gym. But the main problem is not in the uh, app or software. The main problem is in physical gym itself. So we the maybe 60 to 70% of value that user gets, it's from the gym. So unfortunately or fortunately, we have to scale by physically opening and operating gyms. But I have experience with Invictus to franchise. So we hope that after a certain number of studios that we will open ourselves, we will change the strategy into asset light model, where we will no longer be opening gyms for our own capital, and instead we will be seeking franchising partners.
So now moving into the actual round that you raised, because I'm very curious how this played out in the conversations with VCs, specifically around this whole idea of asset heavy versus asset light, having to actually open up new studios. What was the usual, or if any, pushback that you had on investors, and what convinced certain investors to say yes and deploy the capital versus others to stay on the sidelines?
Yes, so you're right. This is the first showstopper for a lot of VCs, and this is the question number one. A lot of people ask, but somebody has to open physically locations, and if no one does, then for the next 40 years again, the fitness studios, fit gyms will be all the same. A thing that makes a lot of VCs change their mind is if they physically come and see Hero Journey for themselves, or even better, if they try to work out. Those who try to work out, they are immediately convinced because it's completely new, elevated experience. We use a lot of technology to completely change the experience user has, and thanks to this, we have those numbers that we have. Not only we managed to get engagement 2.5 times bigger, larger than in traditional gyms, but we also managed to get better economics as well. From the square foot of location, we produce also 2 or 2.5 times more revenue than traditional gyms. So if you add all this up, you quickly see that our unit economics is very strong. We have net margin of 42%. Gross margin is even higher, so it's like SaaS businesses margins.
That's very interesting. And I'm curious how many people that you actually end up speaking with in terms of investors went ahead and came to the gym and tried working out, tried to experience it firsthand.
Well, maybe out of 20 VCs or 25 VCs with whom I spoke, maybe half of them gave immediately no answer, but of the remaining, maybe half went and at least see, and some of them went to train, and all of those who trained, they said yes.
Fantastic.
So in the beginning of the podcast, you were asking how would you describe hero's journey, and I'm still struggling. This is something I have to improve.
It's not an easy thing to do, but the conversion rate on the people who actually came and tried the product and felt the solution on their skin, I think it speaks volumes of the founder's ability to properly articulate what they're doing to that audience. But before we even get to the people who said yes, I'm curious to understand your top of funnel, right? The 20 investor that you mentioned earlier that you spoke with. How did you approach the round planning process of figuring out who to speak to, how many people to speak with, and really how much to raise and at what valuation?
Yes. To give a bit of a context, I am a traditional businessman operating here in Kazakhstan, and the startup and VC ecosystem is very, very new. So I had to learn a lot of things on the go. In the beginning, I even didn't had a plan to do the traditional startup way of funding. Last year, I think it was in Astana, there was this event for startups where we had to pitch like from the for the audience, like for 1 minute, and then we would go to final. If we go to final, then we would pitch for 3 minutes and get the answer. So that got me exposure to a lot of VCs with whom I started to speak, and then I started to learn about the proper startup way of funding. And I immediately was excited for two reasons. One, that this ecosystem started to grow in Kazakhstan, and it was possible to actually talk about funding this way. Two, um, what I really liked about the startup way of funding compared to traditional private equity way of funding, that in each round the equity that you would give up as a founder is much smaller than in traditional fundings. This led me to decide maybe in December last year that this is something I want to do. So first thing, I made a long list of all the potential VCs and the angel investors here in Kazakhstan. But just to make sure that this funding will go through, I also made another list of more traditional investors who know me really well, who trust my businesses, and in some other businesses may even be my partners. So first, I just went through and pitched a lot of them and got a lot of commitments from traditional investors who were ready to fund this project should I elect to take money from them. But then the more I learned about the process, the more I understood that I actually need VC money rather than traditional business people money, because in this way I will be able to do the future rounds more easily, and it will be a better cap table, which apparently is very important for all the VCs. So that's why the process took longer than I imagined, because maybe when I started this process, I didn't even know the half of the VC ecosystem that was in Kazakhstan. But slowly, with recommendations from some people who gave early commitment, I think I finally found about all the VCs that we have here in the region. The reason why I am so focused on VCs that are operating in Kazakhstan or in the region, because I tried to speak with international VCs, and they at the moment do not trust for startup that is coming out of Kazakhstan, even if we claim, and I indeed claim that we have product market fit. And our strategy is actually, after a couple of studies, to go to the US market. And by now, I clearly understand that I will have to raise again some bridge round from the same Kazakhstani VCs and open the first studio in the US using that money to show again that product market fit that works in Kazakhstan works as well, or maybe even better in the US, before I can have validation of the US market to be able to speak with some more international VCs. So this was the process, and I have learned a lot as a result.
I have no doubt, and it's an interesting dynamic when you're building a startup outside of the United States that has a little bit of a smaller venture ecosystem and trying to figure out what are the right source of financing for this and what are the milestones that we need to hit before we can approach US-based investors. But I would like to get a bit of understanding of the very first yes on, let's call it, more traditional business people, and call it a business angel, versus the very first yes from a VC fund. How much different were those two conversations? And can you peel back the curtain a little bit and tell our listeners how those conversations went?
Well, because I have been in the business for 10 plus years, and because I've been building my other Invictus fitness business using the franchising model, I have quite a big network of traditional business people / investors who trusts me, trust my team, and trust my projects. And it was very easy actually to get like maybe 10 yes from those type of people. So it was never about the hero journey per se. It was about me and my team. In contrast, to get the very first yeses from VCs were much harder, because they immediately, a lot of them said that their focus is actually more with SaaS type of businesses, and they refrain, or they not really in their domain to invest in this kind of physical location. For every 3 rejection, there was some yeses, and those were the people who I tried to convince to see the product for themselves, and slowly I could get. Maybe this process took me like half a year, and there was a lot of learning in between. But something I want to say that in the US or in Kazakhstan, it's the same. There are a lot of IT startups, and a lot of those IT startups are very afraid to build something physical, because they think it's something which is not maybe their strengths. And there are a lot of traditional businesses which are very afraid about anything IT, maybe due to the high cost of hiring good programmers or something. So there is a gap between traditional business and the IT. And I think what the Hero's Journey does is we're actually closing this gap.
And as you were pitching those investors and figuring out that if they're coming to actually see the product live and experience that feeling and experience that solution, they'll be much more convinced of potentially investing. I'm curious, how has your story around what you're really building evolved over that period of pitching? And what were some of the helpful resources that you tapped into, be it connections or accelerators or incubators or let's call it conferences or events that you took advantage of to be able to craft that compelling story that got VCs to say yes?
Yes. So as I said, the first the first event that really helped me was called Digital Bridge. It was an event in Astana, Kazakhstan, held by a local incubator. And I pitched there in front of maybe audience of 1,000 people, with in front of all the VCs and angel investors with whom I later had conversation on the same day. Project as a IT startup, because as I say, said before, I'm coming from traditional business background. So there were a couple of events like that which I attended, but really big and interesting one was called Venture Forum, held here in Kazakhstan in Almaty. And this year it had about 1,600 attendees, which is really a lot for our market, because only 3 years ago, maybe there were only, I don't know, 3 startups in Kazakhstan. Now there are like huge amount of numbers, which is exciting because everyone thought that Silicon Valley has this unique culture which is not exportable, but apparently it's being mushrooming everywhere around the globe now, and it's easily exported, as we can see now. So yeah, those events were really helpful because I mean, I met all the investors which eventually invested in those kind of events.
So did you had almost entirely in-person connections with all the investors throughout around, or did you also do some cold outreach and virtual meetings with folks?
I did quite a few virtual meetings as well, but those didn't really work at this stage of my company. So all the successful yeses were from the physical meetings.
Yeah, that was going to be my second question, was like, what did you discover between them? So it seems that the in-person meetings were able to convert significantly faster than the one that are virtual. And I'm curious, in terms of cold outreach versus introductions from other folks, have you done both? Have you done only warm introductions? What will be your experience around the outreach and finding those investors and getting in touch with them?
I didn't have to reach that many investors because our round wasn't that big, and we had a lot of commitments, but they were taking a little bit longer than we wanted. But I want to maybe signify one important introduction that was made by a fellow startup, and he pointed me into direction of a lot of VCs with whom I later met, and some of them decided to invest. So I think it's really helpful to get to talk to other startups who already are at the next stages of their funding, especially in a developing VC market like Kazakhstan VC. So that was really helpful.
And have you felt at all that the macro environment and everything that happened over the past year in terms of global venture funding has really had an impact on your particular round or on the Kazakhstani venture ecosystem?
Uh, well, yes, definitely. This was argument used a lot by VCs when we would speak about valuation. But the good thing about our company is that not only we had good revenue, we were actually profitable. And prior to getting it structured as a startup, we were actually paying out dividends. So this is very different story. So we had infinite runway. We didn't really need to, didn't have this, urgency to invest now, to get money now. So we allowed ourselves, some time before deciding who are the right investors to be on our cap table.
And I heard you say twice the right investors to be on the cap table. What was your process around selecting those individuals? Like, what were the criteria that you put in place to say, I would like to work with this person, but not with this other person?
Well, first of all, I didn't have that great of a choice. As I mentioned before, the VC ecosystem is still very in developing stage in this part of the world. But the bare minimum for us was that the investor who will be on cap table should either be serial angel investor or structured VC. So this is bare minimum, and our lead investor is actually a fund which is multi-geography fund, and one partner is based in the US, and that's why we selected this fund to be our lead investor, because immediately from the conversation it was clear that they support our vision to go to the US market, and they will help us to do so. And I can attest that this was not only first impression. The partner is actually helping us a lot right now initial due diligence of the market.
I'm glad to hear that. We actually had John from Big Sky Capital, which is probably the
Yeah,
person that you
that's the
mentioned. We
guy.
had, he's a good friend, and we had him on the podcast on the VC Architects a
Yeah.
few weeks back. So it's exciting to see both sides of the equation live on the podcast. Definitely a
Yes.
great person to work with. And in terms of your now reflecting back on the raise, right? You were now able to successfully raise your round, what you were expecting to raise in the first place, and you've definitely learned a lot over the past
Yeah.
12 months. And I'm curious to understand if you were to go back to the day before you made the decision to raise venture capital and go on this journey, what would be some of the key points of advice you would give to yourself to hopefully make this process a little bit simpler or prepare yourself for what's to come?
Yes, I think given the information I had at the time, I proceeded as quickly as I learned something. But if I could cut some corners with information I have now, I would just give myself the list of the universe of all the VCs that I know now, so that I would target them in the first place, and not refrain to talking to as many people as possible. Uh, as opposed to talking to them sequentially. So that so I would love this process to be much quicker, because I didn't realize that this is a process that would take like half a year of maybe 30 to 40% of my time, even if it's not like I had to do something actively, but it would always be on top of my mind, and I would always be thinking about it. So, and I would want to learn to do it in much quicker manner, maybe 2 to 3 months maximum, so that I can focus on product, on the business again. So yeah, something I didn't expect was how much time it takes. Definitely need to budget like a lot of time and resources for raising. And I still don't know all the answers, but I want to find for the future rounds a better formula. Maybe I should increase the network of the investors I know, VCs I know. Maybe I should include them into some reports we're doing, etc., etc. And I'm still getting all these advices from other startups. So I don't really know how to answer your question. I'm glad we have finished this funding round, but I don't feel particularly knowledgeable still to advise something.
Interesting. It's always a learning process, right? And it's
Yeah,
constantly evolving. And quite frankly, the market has such a big role to play in that maybe some of the things that work in 2023 may not necessarily work in 2024. So I guess we'd only leave time to tell us that. But I heard you say in the beginning about this whole concept of talking sequentially versus talking to multiple people at the same time. And one of the things that you learned about running let me paraphrase it, a more tight process
yeah.
around fundraising. Can we explore that a little bit further and understand, for some of the founders, let's say, who are thinking about raising the pre-seed round right now, what does that mean, to speak with more people at the same time versus speaking with them sequentially in practice?
A lot of investors would give you soft commits quite quickly, but then they would not follow up with those soft commits for multiple of reasons. And I think you should attribute some kind of probability, whether even if person says that he's in, maybe you should attribute 0.3, 33%, let's say, probability. So instead of talking to one person and waiting for him, you should talk to three people, and one of them should go through. So I think you should speak to 3 times as many investors than you think. That's what I mean, I guess. Because I thought that I have full commitment, and then a lot of them wouldn't go through, and then I had to go back and talk to other people again, etc., etc., which actually was the reason why it dragged on for so long.
That's like incredibly practical advice. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm curious to understand from some of the investors who, issued a soft commitment but then backed out. How was your response to that? How did you manage that as a founder?
I have very thick skin because I have been in business for 12 years, and my some of my other businesses in this market in Kazakhstan were much harder. So uh, it was not hard at all for me. But I can understand that if you are just starting, I remember how I would react when I was younger, when I was starting my first businesses. That those could be very disappointing and discouraging moments, and they can be very, very hard for startup founders. I would say that um, don't get discouraged. Just get back to the process, do it again and again and again and again, and it's just a numbers game. I think in order to close like maybe 3 to 5 investors to invest in your round, you may need to talk to 20, 30, 50 investors, depending on geography and the industry. Uh, and for me, it was a little bit easier than for maybe my peers here in Kazakhstan, because uh, I'm known here as a successful business person, especially in this industry, in fitness industry. So that gives me a lot of credibility when I'm speaking to anybody. But still, the process was a process for me. So I can understand that for a lot of startup founders, it can be much harder. So I think one should prepare to just, not to react to any no's, just to say okay and get ahead.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great lesson to some extent of like it's going to be a hard process for most people. So if you believe coming into this that it's going to be an easy thing that's gone in a week, you may have your expectations shattered by the end of the first week, and understand that it's not, the world is not moving as fast as you would want it to move.
It's not at all.
I appreciate you sharing some of these stories with us, and I would like to move us into a quick rapid fire part of the
Okay.
podcast, which is all about you and a little bit less about the business, to get the listeners a better understanding of who really Iliyas is. And that's really our very first question, which is, what is one thing that people do not know about you that they should know about you?
This is it's hard to say. Maybe one thing that I would want other people to know about me is that I'm very much a product guy. I'm very interested in the product, first of all. I'm very interested in observing the behavior of people, how they react to changes in customer journey. I love to observe. I love to talk to them myself, and this is my favorite part of this journey of the startup building process. So that's why maybe I described myself in my Instagram bio and fitness, because I really think that what we are doing is we are working with psychology, or maybe with behavioral economics. So we are designing some kind of uh, not before something which didn't exist before, and it's very exciting, and that's the favorite part of the job for me. Everything else is just secondary.
Fantastic. And I love this question because a lot of people have a hard time finding like what's that
Yeah.
one thing that they like to share, and it's always something fascinating that people hold. And I'm curious to understand on to the second question, what is a recent book slash article slash conversation slash podcast episode that has really changed the way you view the world, or challenged a previously held belief very strongly?
Oh, that's easy. My favorite podcast for maybe last couple of years has been Acquired podcast, and through Acquired, I learned about this framework which they would use at the end of the episode, which was when they would analyze every company through the lens of 7 powers. I was like, what is 7 powers? And then I researched and I found out that it's a strategy framework by Hamilton Helmer, which is favored by Daniel Ek, by Netflix founder, and all these great CEOs. And I really dived into 7 Powers. It's I bought the book. I've read it several times. It's very mathematical. Thanks. I also have economics degree, so it was something I knew before. And when I now analyze any of my businesses, I always use 7 Powers framework, like to show me the way, whether we should prioritize this initiative or not, whether we should go into this direction or not. So in post PMF businesses, I always try to ask ourselves, are we building any of those 7 Powers or not? And the goal of startup post PMF is, of course, to build some of those powers.
I'm glad you brought up the Acquired podcast, one of my favorite podcasts as well. And the episode on 7 Powers is great, but they also have so many other incredible episodes where dive really deep into certain.
Yeah. But they would always analyze every company at the end of the episode using this framework. Yes.
Absolutely. So I'm happy when they brought him actually live on the podcast to discuss the book and the framework with the person who created it.
Yeah. That's also
awesome.
One of my favorite ones. Yes.
Third and penultimate question: what is one person that you've consistently looked up to over your career or your life?
Well, right now it's Elon Musk. I'll show you something. This is Walter Isaacson book about biography of Elon Musk, and you'd say, yeah, that book just came out, but it's really hard to get it in Kazakhstan. So I had to ship it from the UK and with FedEx, and it cost me maybe 5 times more to ship it than to buy the book itself.
So a true Elon Musk fan.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we all agree that he's jerk, that he's not a nice person, but the way he ignores the conventional wisdom and starts from the first principle and doesn't take anything for granted is just fascinating. And I have learned a lot, because what we try to do with Hero's Journey is exactly the same. We try to ignore everything that was known in fitness industry. We try to redesign it from the scratch, so that the goal will not be, efficiency of trainings, because as if your client is bodybuilder, but instead efficiency times frequency, which would give you the product. So yeah, definitely learned a lot from Elon Musk. And
great answer. And I'm really curious to hear the answer to your the last question. A long-standing tradition that we have at the company, which is ending every conversation or meeting with a point of gratitude towards other team members, and we wanted to bring that into the podcast. So our final question to you is, as we end this podcast episode today, who is one person, and you unfortunately only have to pick one, that you would like to say thank you for or show some gratitude for their impact on your life or career?
I would love to thank my father, who was also a business person. He was Soviet manager when Kazakhstan was part of Soviet Union, and he was one of the first business people when Soviet Union in 1986, when they did perestroika, allowed to register the first companies. So I think he had one of the first, maybe if not the first company registered in Kazakhstan, which was back then called cooperative instead of company. And he was not young, but still he had strength to reinvent himself, to adapt himself to private market, and eventually ended up being very successful businessman. And growing up, I grew up on all of his stories because it was so fresh for him back then. He would always like to share that, and I grew up in this entrepreneurial childhood, and eventually when I graduated and started working myself, I couldn't see myself anything but as an entrepreneur. So I would like to extend my thanks to my father.
Fantastic. Such a great answer. I'm really glad you shared that with us. And my thank you goes to you. Really appreciate you for taking the time to join us share some of your story and your background and your experience building your company and raising money for your company. And I'm certain a lot of founders are going to get a lot of value from this conversation, hopefully be inspired to build the next big thing and have more tools in their toolkit to raise the right capital from the right people for their business. Really appreciate you, Iliyas, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Vlad. It was a great honor for me.
What a great conversation. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe to our podcast and be on the lookout for a new episode in 2 weeks as we interview another amazing startup founder and debrief their successful fundraising story. This podcast was made possible by Flowlie. If you're currently fundraising or planning to do so in the near future, create a free account today on Flowlie at flowlie.com. That's flowlie.com. And get access to an investor database curated just for you and powerful deck sharing capabilities with advanced access and engagement tracking. Are you ready to take your fundraising journey to the next level and join thousands of founders across the globe who use the platform every single day? Find the discount code in the show notes and sign up today. That's it for today's episode. See you next time.